at the beginning of the class last week, I said if you're a fan of information overload, you were going to love that 35-minute class, because I just kind of dumped a wagon load of history at you to just kind of set the stage. I wasn't doing that for retention purposes in some senses, or for giving a quiz later, but did that so that hopefully when we actually then begin to look through this chronology and narrative of the book of Ezra, then maybe some of those names will jump back out you in time periods and things like that. The book of Ezra is challenging, and I didn't really talk much about this aspect of it, but it's challenging in the sense that we like our things linear, right? We like point A, and then we go to the end, right? That's how you do things. Ezra doesn't do it that way. Ezra will spend a little bit of time in this time period, then guess what he does in chapter 4? He leapfrogs, and he goes and talks about things that happen at the end, and then after he does that, he leapfrogs back, and he talks about things that are present. And so anyway, we'll have to be patient with the process as we study the book of Ezra, because he doesn't have that natural flow that we kind of like sometimes when it comes to storytelling, if you will. And where there's just a very natural beginning and a very natural end. He just doesn't write it that way. And we'll kind of catch up and figure those things out as we go. We mentioned Sunday that there are two primary characters here, right? Who are they? Okay, Ezra and Zerubbabel. And the first one we're going to talk about is Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel is in the lineage of whom? Okay, so both of those, right? He's in the lineage of the kings back to David, and ultimately in the lineage of Jesus, right? Because he's from the tribe of Judah, right? So when you think of Zerubbabel, think king, think authority. Think of one who's leading from the standpoint or the idea of one who's in a position of governor, right? He's got this authoritative role in the work that he's going to come back to do, to kind of oversee the construction of things as they return back to Jerusalem. Ezra is in the lineage of whom? Aaron, right? He's in the lineage of Aaron, and so he is a priest. He's a Levite, okay? He's of the tribe of Levi. And so he's going to focus, when he gets there, on the hearts and minds of the people to get them back centered on worship towards God and how they should honor and serve Him. So when you think of these two men, think of them that way. Their roles are different. They are both leaders. They're both instrumental and crucial in the return of God's people out of Babylonian captivity and returning back to the homeland. But they have different kinds of roles based on the preservation of the lineage that God had intended and the focus that they would have. So all right, so let's start. Chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. We're introduced to another character, and that person is Cyrus. Now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. Now, it's interesting, just from a timeline standpoint, when he says the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, he's not referencing his first year of his reign. He's actually referencing his first year after he took over whom? Babylon, okay? If you go back into other historical documents, and you can see he was already ruling when he takes over Babylon. But when he does that, this reference is to the point in time in which he takes over Babylon, which means he's also now in charge of whom? All those exiles, right, that ended up in that region. He now is in charge of them as well. And so this is Cyrus, king of, and by the way, just for historical backdrop, just to help you, how did he end up in charge over Babylon? Who did he defeat? Belshazzar, right? That's that mene, tekel, upharsin, the handwriting on the wall, right? That scene, right? When Nebuchadnezzar's son loses the control because Cyrus comes in, he weakens himself. They're having that big celebration in Daniel chapter 5, and that big feast, and they're even using the utensils they brought out of the temple as that, right? I'm just trying to connect the dots for you. That's the time period we're talking about here. Same chronological time period. Cyrus takes over. Now, just to feed you more information, but I want you to notice with me, I want you to jump over to Isaiah chapter 44. Because it is not coincidence that Cyrus happens to be the guy in charge in Persia when he takes over Babylon. Roughly 150 years earlier, Isaiah said this, "Thus saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasure, even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, and to the temple thy foundation shall be laid." Keep reading chapter 45. "Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him, and I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. I will go before thee, and make the crooked places straight, and I will break in pieces the gates of brass, and cut in sunder the bars of iron. And I will give thee the treasures of darkness and hidden riches of secret places, that thou mayest know that I, the Lord, which call thee by thy name, am the God of Israel." This was prophesied concerning before it ever happens. God had determined, Isaiah had prophesied it, that this Cyrus would be the one who ultimately would fulfill the second part of God's prophecies. He uses whom first to bring the captivity? That's Nebuchadnezzar, right? That's Nebuchadnezzar to bring this captivity on upon the people. And so long as Nebuchadnezzar was doing God's will, everything was what? Everything was fine. Everything was fine. But the minute he decides to begin to think he's more powerful, in fact, he had to live kind of like a wild animal for a period of time to get the picture. But during that time period, you see God using him, but he never intended to fulfill the return through him. He intended to fulfill the return of God's people back to Jerusalem through Cyrus. And it had been prophesied even before it ever happens. I just thought that's important for us to recognize. That what we're seeing in the book of Ezra is not coincidental. It's not happenstance. It's not, well, it just so happened that this, and this. No, there's reason why Zerubbabel, from the lineage of the kings, is leading this first wave of people back. There's reason why Ezra enters the picture as the lineage of the priests when he returns later to begin to reestablish the people as those who have worshiped God. All of it is happening through the purposes and intents that God desires. So, in the first year of his rule over this region, after taking over Babylon, the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled. Jeremiah speaks of these same matters. "The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing." So if you look in Jeremiah chapter 25, and I'm just trying to connect these prophecies for you that he's referencing here. He said, "And this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. And it shall come to pass, when 70 years are accomplished, that I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, saith the Lord, for their iniquity, and the land of the Chaldeans, and will make it perpetual desolations. And I will bring upon that land all my words which I have pronounced against it, even all that is written in this book, which Jeremiah hath prophesied against all nations." So this extra one more contemporary prophet is addressing the things that God fully intended to happen, and as it eventually is fulfilled in the days of Cyrus. One more Jeremiah prophecy, verse 10 of chapter 29. For thus saith the Lord, that after 70 years be accomplished at Babylon, I will visit you, and perform my good word towards you, and causing you to return to this place. And so it's interesting, even as they're being led captive, God is already saying, I'm going to what? I'm going to bring you back. Right? It reminds me a lot of what happens in the book of Genesis after Adam and Eve sin and transgress against God's will. If you recall, in one moment, he's breathing out the consequences and punishments, right? He's telling him, these are the things that are going to happen because you've sinned and transgressed against me. But in the very same breath, he also talks about he has bruised his heel, but I will bruise his head, right? There's that imagery of coming hope and promise, even in the midst of a conversation about consequence. Same thing here. These contemporary prophets in the days of Ezra and Zerubbabel have been talking about the things that God was going to fulfill and the manner in which he was going to fulfill them, even using men like Cyrus to accomplish it. So Cyrus makes this proclamation, and he basically says this in verse 2. The Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and hath charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. So Cyrus just acknowledges that God has given him instructions that he's supposed to reestablish the people, but not, it's interesting, not just let them go, right? That'd be one thing to say, God told me to let the people go. But God's instructions were more specific than that. God tells him not just let the people go, but you're going to do what? You're going to build that house for me. I have blessed you. I have let you overcome other nations. I have given into your hands lots of benefit. What you're doing in return for me, Cyrus, is you're going to build my house back in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. But for that to happen, what are they going to need? In verse 3. You got to have people to go do it, right? You can say that God told me to rebuild this temple. You can say God wants me to let these people, right? You can make all the proclamations and declarations you want, but somebody's got to go do it. It reminds me a lot of you ever been in around environments where people always have great ideas? They're the idea guy, right? But when it comes to actually putting feet to the work and hands to the work, they're nowhere to be found. They're just idea guys. Well, this wouldn't have been of any benefit for Cyrus to have an idea or something that God instills into his mind. No, he's got to put feet on the ground in Jerusalem in order for that to happen. So how's he do that? How's he get people to go back to Jerusalem to do this work? Now, I'm not trying to trick you. The text tells us. Yeah, he just asks them. He just goes to the people and says, who wants to go? We know that not all of them went, right? One in particular that always jumps off the page to me is Daniel, right? He's obviously older by this point in time, and he's very much kind of attached, if you will, and part of that fabric that he had become there in Babylon and still in the time of Cyrus. So he's one example of somebody who decides to stay, and he's just one of many who decided they're not going to go back. So Cyrus asks, who is it among all the people? His God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Lord God of Israel. He is the God which is in Jerusalem. So Cyrus is stirred in his heart. God has blessed him. God tells him, you need to build me a temple back in Jerusalem, a house for my people to worship in. And then he basically goes to the people and says, this is the charge that God has given us. Who's ready to step up? And I think there's tons of parallel lessons there, by the way. We talked a minute ago about the thought that it's one thing to have ideas, it's another thing to do the work necessary to fulfill that. Just sit there and ask yourself for a minute, would you have gone? Right? Would you have gone? Because if you leave, it means you're going to have to leave. And let me ask you this. What do we know about their general existence during this 70-year exile / captivity? Okay. That, and I want us to think about that. When they leave Egypt, what had they been crying out before the Lord? Yeah, this is horrible, right? This is horrible. You know, they're pleading with God to get them out of this circumstance, because that was true enslavement, right? They were beholden to Pharaoh in a very different kind of way, and they wanted out. Their existence during this exile time was not necessarily... Who had it rough, actually, in that time period? Or who had it rougher? Yeah, the ones that were still back there, right? Not the ones that ended up in exile and able to leave Judah, leave Jerusalem, and find themselves in different locations. But it was the folks who remained in that embattled area that really had it difficult during that time period. And all I'm trying to get us to recognize here is when he comes and says, who's ready to go do hard things? Who's ready to leave the comforts that you've established over these past 70 years and go back to Jerusalem and do some very hard things? Now, did they fully understand all the obstacles they were going to have to overcome? Probably not. But they would have understood that the travel itself wasn't going to be easy. They would have understood that when they were going to get back to Jerusalem, what were they going to find? The place in what? The place was in ruins, okay? You're going to have to do some really hard things. And I think God calls all of us sometimes to leave the comfortable and go do hard things. And commit ourselves in ways to service to God that is willing to step out of comfort zones and do things that are challenging, do things that are difficult, do things that I didn't necessarily expect myself to have to do, right? God throughout history has called upon His people to get out of what's easy and do the difficult. And here's an example of that, where these people were being called to decide, stay in the comforts or recognize this tremendous opportunity and goal and purpose of God to go back and rebuild what had been left in ruins. Your thoughts about that comparison that you might have there? I'm just trying to note, and I'm doing that with you because as you read through this, it's easy to get kind of trapped in this is just a historical document, right? All we're doing when we're reading Ezra is just reading history. But notice there are examples and things for us to kind of glean from if we'll pay attention to it and catch it as we go. So you want to go back to Jerusalem? Go back. Verse 4. And whosoever remaineth in any place where he sojourneth, let the men of his place help him with silver and with gold and with goods and with beasts, beside the freewill offering for the house of God that is in Jerusalem. So, two things, if you're going to stay behind, you got to do. One is you're going to have to fund it, right? Quick thought, by the way, back to the fact that this was a more comfortable existence. He's telling me you're going to have to fund it, which means they had means by which to do that. They had means. They had established themselves in such a way in that time period. They had means by which to actually fund the travel, the needs, the situations that they were going to have to overcome. And then the second thing they were going to have to fund was what? The building of the house itself. So you got two responsibilities here. You've got to help the people. If you're going to stay back, you got to help the people get there. And you also have to help fund the construction and work they're going to do once they're there. Just quick historical thought process here, just to jog the cobwebs out of your mind for a minute. Can you think of anything else that's similar to that, where people that didn't go had to maybe do something? It's a weird way to ask it, but if I'd asked it too plain, it would just tell you. When they go and conquer Canaan, the promised land, there were a couple of groups, right, that established themselves on the other side of Jordan. Who were they? Anybody remember? Say it again, Judy. Yeah, I believe so. Right. So they wanted to stay put. Right. They'd established themselves, but what instruction was given to them about going in the conquest? Yeah, and not only go, but you're going to do what? You're in the front of the line. When we go into battle, if you want to stay over here on the other side of Jordan, where you've kind of already established your tribe, and got what you want over here, that's fine. We're not going to force you to cross the Jordan and go over, but you're not staying over here while the rest of us have to go fight for the land that God intended for us. You're going to go, and you're not only going to go and fight, but you're going to be the front lines of those battles. And so not exact, but it's similar, right? You may want to kind of stay put. You may want the benefits of the comforts that you have presently. Okay. Fair enough, but it doesn't exempt them from finding a way to get involved. Second lesson, number one, do hard things. Number two, maybe I can't, right? Maybe my physical body won't let me travel from, up here to the north and start coming back down into. There might be legitimate reasons why I physically can't go and help reconstruct the temple, but I can still have a what? Still have a part in it, right? I can still get involved in it. The second lesson here, do hard things. Number two, part of doing hard things may mean finding where I fit in that. What's my role in doing those challenging works of God? Where do I fit in? And maybe I'm the hands that actually do the work. Maybe I'm the support that's necessary to get that work done. And we all may have different roles depending on what that work and purpose is. But my point simply is find a way to get involved. And don't sit back and say, well, that's too hard for me, or my skills won't let me do that work. But ask yourself, okay, what can I do to help that? What can I bring to the table to help that situation? Because that's what they're all being asked to do here. You decide. You can either get in line with us and head on back to Jerusalem and let's get busy building the temple. Or you can start gathering up silver, gold, animals, whatever you got, and start organizing that so that the people that are going back have the means by which to do the work that's intended. Find a way to get involved. Can I turn preacher hat on for a minute? Friends, it's real easy to just sit here, right? It's real easy to just come in, we sit down, we do our We do our worship. We go home. The next time the doors are open, we come back. We do our thing, right? But I'm asking is how can I get involved? How can I take part in the work? How can I actively participate in the purposes and work that God intends for us to fulfill? And that's the kind of thing we need to be asking ourselves. Just as God's people in those days had to ask themselves that, we need to be asking ourselves that in service and work towards God and presently. And I think it's a great lesson for us within the structure of this history that we're looking at. Go ahead, Randy.
The other thing to keep in mind, and I always found this intriguing, we talk about Babylon to Jerusalem, and we think of a lot of times, what's that? The straight line, if you look at it on the map, is somewhere between 400 and 500 miles. But that's not, that in and of itself is a long trip on foot.
Yeah.
Right? But the reality is, it's closer to 1,100 miles on average because of rivers and what you have to get around and things like that. So we're not talking about some gold and silver to get them, from here to Wheeling, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about they're going to have to be supported for months and months. So what's being asked of both sides is very important.
Sure. The sacrifice that both sides of this are making, absolutely. So in verse 5, then rose up the chief of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, with all them whose spirit God had raised, to go up to build the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem. Now that's, anything jump out at you there? Just asking, just think about the chief of the fathers of who? Of Judah and Benjamin, which are the what in the mapping? They're the south, right? Everything else was what? Known as what? Israel. Everything in the north is known as Israel. Where are they? Right? They were taken captive as well. In fact, they fell first. They fell first. But it's interesting, when it comes to this point, you're just kind of down to Judah and Benjamin that are stepping up here in the forefront to make sure this work of reestablishing Jerusalem and the house of the Lord there in that time period. And all they, verse 6, and all they that were about them strengthened their hands with vessels of silver, with gold, with goods, and with beasts, and with precious things, beside all that was willingly offered. So you've got kind of compulsory giving, right? And then also the free will. So it seems like they kind of came and said, listen, here's what you're going to have to give. And then in addition to that, there were those who even gave more, right, of the willing offering. I don't know that you have this contrast, if you will, or comparison of beside all that was willingly offered. If there's a portion that is willingly offered, am I fair in arguing that there was a portion that was unwillingly offered, right? It was compulsory. They had something they were required, in a sense, to do. And so they had a lot of things provided to them from what was kind of directed for them to give. When these leaders got up and said, okay, here's the plan, here's the purpose, here's the needs, here's what you guys are going to give. And then you had others who jumped on board and said, I'll give even more. Here's another lesson. Do hard things. Find a way to be involved in those hard things. Number 3 is sometimes even do more than what is expected. Ask yourself sometimes, when was the last time that I did not what just was expected of me, but when was the last time I went above and beyond? When was the last time I didn't just do what I felt like was my duty to do, but I did that which was in some senses more willingly offered? Because they had both here. They had those who fulfilled their duty and gave what they were required to give, and others who went above and beyond and even provided more so that they would have what they needed to build the house of God when they get back there.
Did Jesus teach that? Go mile over, mile go two.
Right, and that
Do
principle,
more than you have to do.
right, that principle of go the second mile, right, is based on the fact that they can be compelled by the Roman soldiers, would walk up and say, you need to carry those bags for me, and they were legally compelled to carry it the first mile. Jesus uses that to illustrate that don't just carry it the first mile, but carry it the second mile, go even beyond what was duty bound to fulfill. And so you're right, Jesus illustrates just in a different way the very same thing that's happening here as it comes to God's people as they begin this process to head back. But here's what's interesting. So that came from the people. Cyrus, because he's also been commanded of God to make sure the people have what they need to make this happen, he brought forth the vessels of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had brought forth out of Jerusalem and had put them in the house of his gods. Right? We referenced at the beginning of our study this morning that scene with Belshazzar and that feast that they were having using the utensils of God's house. And Cyrus is wise enough to know that if they're going to go back and reestablish worship and build a temple for Jehovah back in Jerusalem, they're going to need the things that Nebuchadnezzar took from that temple. Even those did Cyrus, king of Persia, bring forth by the hand of Mithridath, the treasurer. We're going to call him that anyway, whether that's pronounced right or not. And this is going to get interesting for a minute too. And numbered them unto Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. Can anybody tell me who Sheshbazzar is? Okay, so fair enough guess. I shouldn't say guess, fair enough potentiality, that's a fairer word. Anybody else? I read a couple of schools of thought on this. One is that is Zerubbabel's Babylonian name. And so we're dealing with Zerubbabel here, but because that happens sometimes, right? Who ended up in the fiery furnace? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or, see, you don't even remember their Israelite names, right? You don't even remember them. All you remember is their Babylonian names. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that was their Babylonian names given to us. Hananiah, Azariah, right? They had original names. When these folks came into, they were given, they had their original name, and then they were given Babylonian names. And so the idea is that potentially here, this Sheshbazzar is Zerubbabel. And let me illustrate a couple of passages that'll help maybe center that for us. Look at Ezra chapter 5. If you're flipping there, I'll show it to you on the screen as well. In verse 16 of Ezra chapter 5, then came the same Sheshbazzar and laid the foundation of the house of God which is in Jerusalem, and since that time even until now hath it been in building, and yet it is not finished. Go to Ezra chapter 3 and verse 8. Now in the second year of their coming, and remember I told you that Ezra doesn't care about chronology. He'll bounce the story frontwards, backwards, and sideways. Now in the second year of their coming unto the house of God at Jerusalem, in the second month, began Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshaiah, the son of Jozadak, and the remnant of their brethren, the priests and Levites, and all that were come out of the captivity under Jerusalem, and appointed the Levites from 20 years old and upward to set forward the work of the house of the Lord. All I'm trying to illustrate to you is that both chapters are talking about the beginning of the foundation and construction of the temple. When you read Ezra 5, the guy in charge in that moment is referenced as Sheshbazzar. In chapter 3, in verse 8, he's referenced as Zerubbabel. I generally believe that that's enough circumstantial evidence to point that this Sheshbazzar is most likely just the Babylonian name for Zerubbabel. Now you could read from some other scholars, and they would just argue it's just a completely different guy. It's just another guy that's involved in the work. But when I compared Ezra 5 and Ezra 3, and the conversation is about the beginning of the foundations of the temple, it just seemed to fit to me that we're talking about the same guy, just a Babylonian name or his original name, Zerubbabel. So you can go home and research that and come back next Sunday if you want. And we'll talk a little bit more about that.